Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Asian Forum. I will not speak much in the beginning, and I will give floor to opening words to Marko Mihkelson, who is chairman of Estonian Parliamentary Committee for Foreign Affairs. So please.
Very good morning to everybody. I'm very happy to see you in Estonian Parliament. Particularly, I'm happy that this second Asian Forum, which is dedicated obviously to this special program, is also taking place in this conference hall, actually the very first one we organized together with Development Foundation last year. Took place also here in this hall. So I hope that this is very nice tradition, and these doors are always open for Asian forums in our parliament. If you allow me, I maybe say a couple of words why we here in Estonian Parliament pay attention to this, what happens in Asia, or what happens in, let's say, our thinking about Asia. It's obviously not a big news for you that the world is changing, and already has changed quite a bit during last some time, let's say. And obviously for us, and I as chairman of Foreign Affairs Committee of Estonian Parliament, we pay quite a lot of attention to this and try to analyze what is going on beyond our borders, and what is going on a little bit further on, also not only in our immediate neighborhood, which is obviously for every country priority number one. So actually for years already Estonian Parliament has paid more in detail attention to this, what trends are visible in Asia, and not particularly only about China, but also about many other countries. And at the beginning of this particular parliament sort of period, this parliament was was elected in 2011. Basically, at the beginning, our committee decided to write reports on Asian strategy for 2025 for Estonia. This was let's say, the very first exercise of such kind on a political level in Estonia. And I was I am, not only was, but I am very happy that also our government took initiative also and wrote their own program, which was adopted last November, Asia program, and also very first one among these kind of the papers. And today we obviously in our committee's work trying to focus on different issues, different topics which are very important for Estonia, in partnership with other countries, and also in partnership with countries in this particular region. What is the best possible way to network with Asian countries for trade, investments, political relations, and so on and so forth. So I think that we are, let's say, at the beginning of our long road, and obviously all these kind of conferences, these kind of events are extremely important to raise knowledge about the Asia, which is very interesting, obviously, and very important region of our world. I'm more than sure, looking at this content of this program, that today's event will be a very interesting one, and I very much hope that everybody who participated, particularly to this program for some time already, get from the speakers, from today's program, some interesting ideas to work on Asia, and also particularly today on relations with China. Thank you very much, and have a very, very interesting day today here in Estonian Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Marko Mihkelson. My name is Peter Gornischeff. I serve as a Director of Services at the Estonian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And I also serve as a project manager for the Bench project because this Asian Forum is organized in cooperation with the project Bench. And before parliamentarian Markus Lohi and Governor Elisabeth Nilsson will get the floor, I would like to show you a small, let's say, we can call it also an icebreaker. We had a visit to Jiangsu province in March last year, and I would like to show you a small video about this event.
Bench is an EU-funded project with members from Estonia, Finland and Sweden. The mission is to develop the exchange with China for the benefit of trade and industry. In March 2012, a unique Nordic-Baltic business delegation visited China. The delegation went to Shanghai, Wuxi and Nanjing, where the participating regions arranged Nordic Room seminars together. The first one was held in Shanghai.
We think this can be a very interesting way of working, as we are representing 3 small countries in a giant world, and especially when you travel to a country like China and also a region like Shanghai and Jiangsu province. Maybe we can create new relations between people, between businesses, between official representatives. And when you get in touch with people, then you get possibilities to solve challenging problems for all of us.
I can see that there is a big interest in business from the Chinese companies' side. And we can see that we can cooperate with Nordic countries and China together. I can also see that Chinese companies are coming more and more international, and they speak very good English actually.
The Chinese perspective, we will learn a lot about them, about the industry, on their competitive edge, on how we can further collaborate. And on the Chinese perspective, we would like to share what we can bring on the table. Like today, I give a speech on the China economic outlook this year to reassure them the China economic growth and the transition plan, especially the 12 5-year plan and the restructuring of our economy, and so on and so forth.
We believe that China is really putting effort to the investments, and we have huge potential for win-win situation with China and our countries. There is possibility for capital that helps our companies, and we can provide knowledge, good products, high technology, good people. That's a good combination.
那么我想通过今天这个活动啊，那么大家可以建立一些联系。那么所以刚才有很多是从爱沙尼亚过来的，包括是瑞典的一些这个生意人啊，非常希望能够跟上海建立这样的一个联系。我想我是作为这个中小企业服务的一个机构啊，那么像跟他们建立一个联系，也是帮助这个他们能够进入上海来发展，同时也希望能够引荐一些上海的一些企业家，跟他们做一些对接。
Well, we know from previous experience that other delegations like this has been quite successful, and since there is such a large number of links between the politicians and counties and the countries, it's good for the business to be able to profit on them too. So that was a direct reason why we came.
Our economy in Europe is a little bit down at the moment, but it's clear that we are again going up, and it's very useful, I think, for Chinese to invest into European companies.
We have a problem in Sweden today that more than 80% of the Swedish exports go to non-growing countries. Therefore, it's very important not only for big companies, but also to small and medium-sized companies to go to the growing markets instead. And as you know, China is a very, very important market that still grows, so obviously they need to be here as well.
Estonian companies should also know what's happening in Estonia, what's happening in China, and also create beneficial business cooperations between Chinese companies. So it's beneficial both for Estonian companies and also for Chinese companies to have very strong and tight relations.
One of the business development opportunities is, of course, to develop business towards a large and emerging economy such as China. So to be here together with companies, together with other researchers from other countries, and together with the government representatives, this can be very informative, and we learn a lot from doing this kind of trip together to Shanghai and to China.
我想通过这一次的代表团来，能够就是说把一些瑞典的小公司的，除了呢原来来的那些大公司以外，一些小公司的新的发明、新的一些技术能够引进到上海。我想这是对今后他们寻找更多的中国市场，也为中国的企业能够引进一些好的技术、好的创意我想是非常好的一次机会谢谢。
This is something that we do for the first time, and it has given us a lot of new experience and knowledge useful for the future.
I'm very satisfied with the visit. It has been a lovely visit.
I think I have to close my Outlook because some of the presentations just came today morning. But now the floor is to Mr. Markus Lohi, parliamentarian from Finnish National Parliament. Please. Could I take this place? Yes, you can take.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to appear in front of you as an invited speaker at the conference that serves as the second Estonia-Asia conference and the final bench conference. I would like to extend my warm thanks to our Estonia hosts. I'm very pleased to meet Mr. Marko Mihkelson, Chairman of the Committee of Foreign Affairs of Estonia Parliament. Estonia has earned a reputation for being a responsible and pragmatic member of the European Union and a country that is friendly to business. It's very fitting that the final conference of European Union program that helps small and medium-sized enterprises expand their business operation to China is taking place in Tallinn, Estonia. I would also like to express my pleasure of meeting Ms. Nilsson, Governor of Östergötland, and other Swedish guests at this event. Sweden and Finland have always had very close commercial, cultural, and historical ties, and we continue to treasure these relationships. A joint EU program that helps small SMEs in our respective countries to prosper and become more international testifies to the fact that Estonia, Sweden and Finland share common goals and a desire to work together, not only to promote commercial interest, but also to increase cooperation among themselves. Cooperation between nations succeeds best when it's done at the grassroots level, at the initiative of individuals. I have been told that much of the honor of creating and developing cooperation within this program belongs to Annika Holmström, Program Manager for Lead Partner. As the title of this seminar proposes, a new look at China is indeed needed. Much has changed since Ben started 2010. China has a new leadership and a new 5-year plan. The plan focuses on 7 national development priorities, including alternative energy, energy efficiency, and environmental protection. But the plan is in danger of being undermined by challenges China faces. In comparison to 2010, the most noticeable challenge has been the declining growth rate. In that year, the economic growth rate in China was more than 10%. The economists now predict that for the period between 2013 and 2017, economic growth in China will average 7.5%. But it's not only China that is different. The European Union is also confronted with the challenge of slowing economic growth. To keep our standard of living at its current level, we need more companies such as those who have gathered here, companies that are constantly looking for opportunities to grow and expand in Europe and outside of it. I have worked in the private sector with SMEs, and in the course of meeting many hardworking CEOs of these companies, my respect for them and the sacrifices they have made has only grown. These SMEs are indeed the cornerstone of our economies. They are especially important for innovation and job creation. The more opportunities SMEs have to expand, the better off we all are. This is why projects such as BENS are important. They support SMEs, helping them expand to international markets, and by doing so, increase their chances to grow and provide job opportunities. Dear guests, during this conference, you will hear a long list of needs that BENS officials and various speakers have identified in China. You will also hear about the challenges companies face when they are trying to meet those demands. I will not talk about them all, but note only 2 development issues that are close to my heart: the need for a clean environment and geographically balanced economic growth in China. The environmental challenges that face China are enormous, and since there are no borders in the air, their air pollution problems are also ours. This is why it's important to look for every opportunity we can find to cooperate with China in the field of environmental protection. The cleaner the air is, the cleaner our air is too. The better the soil is, the healthier the food is that we import from China. Contaminated air, water and soil are a problem for all citizens in China, rich and poor alike. In January 2013, the quality of air was so bad in Beijing that the city government had to shut down more than 100 factories and order 1/3 of government vehicles off the streets. Did you know that there are almost 5.2 million vehicles in Beijing, as many as there are people in Finland? Our Nordic companies have the knowledge and skills to make vehicles more environmentally friendly, and we wish to share this knowledge with the Chinese. Much of the air pollution comes from burning of coal as the source of energy. I have served on the board of directors of an energy company in Rovaniemi, Finland, for many years, and I find the discussion of China energy needs especially interesting. China now accounts for 47% of global coal consumption, almost equal to all other countries in the world combined. And its use of coal keeps increasing. This is a very troubling trend. We have to support every measure China takes toward increasing the use of alternative energy. Our Nordic companies have to know how to provide technology to meet this challenge. We are also interested in helping the Chinese reduce poisonous emissions of the factories and power plants that still keep burning the coal. Ignoring dirty coal will not make it clean. The second major challenge China is facing is the uneven geographical development. That has split the country into developed coastal areas and undeveloped western regions. Such inequality breeds inequality of opportunities in education, healthcare, senior care and employment. The Chinese government is trying to decrease the wealth disparity by increasing the minimum pay and upgrading social welfare. With measures like these, domestic consumption is expected to increase. With more disposable income, ordinary Chinese citizens can buy more goods and services. For Nordic companies, this is good news. We have high-quality goods and services from schizos to armchairs, from phones to medical equipment, that our companies are eager to sell to the Chinese consumers. Dear guests, in the future, when global warming has melted ice in the Arctic Sea, many of these goods will be transported through the Arctic Sea road that will connect Europe to Asia Pacific. This road is the shortest road between two large markets, and its use will reduce transportation costs substantially. The Nordic countries are exploring opportunities to build the shipping infrastructure and develop the Arctic area with the interested nations. I represent the people of Lapland, the northern part of Finland, and for me and constituents, it's very important to see that the Arctic is developed in a way that protects its sensitive environment. In anticipation of closer economic ties with China in the Arctic area, we are eager to share our views of how this area should be developed. Simultaneously, we want to learn more about China and broaden our understanding of its political, economic and legal system. We are well on our way to doing just that. At the University of Lapland, in my hometown of Rovaniemi, there is the Chinese professor from the Renmin University in Beijing, who is teaching students about the Chinese legal system and its commercial law. Academic exchange between the Nordic countries and China has increased substantially in the past 10 years, and it's indeed an important way to preparing especially our young people for closer cooperation. Nordic companies are eager to do business with China, but for them to reach their full potential at the Chinese market and for the Chinese to benefit from their high-tech products and services, Nordic companies need a fair and transparent business environment. They need better networks for exchanging and diffusing knowledge. They need to know that their intellectual property is protected. They need an environment where they can conduct business without concern for corruption or unequal treatment before the law. Each year we see China working harder to eradicate distortions and provide open markets for all. We applaud these efforts wholeheartedly. Dear guests, in 1953, Finland became the first Western country to conclude a bilateral trade agreement with China. to be here talking about China that is so different than it was in 1953. In the parliament building of the free and independent Estonia, to the audience of Nordic nationals who work together to improve trade and investment with China is a great privilege. Thank you for inviting me. I wish you the best of success with the conference, and I hope that we will have many more opportunities to come together to celebrate entrepreneurship and cross-border Nordic cooperation.
And now the forewords by Miss Elisabeth Nilsson, Governor of Östergötland.
Honorary guests, ladies and gentlemen, this is my very first visit in Estonia and in Tallinn, and I would really like to thank the Estonian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and their director, General Mait Pals, that kindly has invited me and our group to be here in Tallinn. Thank you so much. And I would like to give a special thanks to the Estonian parliamentarian and chairman of the Committee for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Marko Mihkelson, who has given the Bench project the opportunity to be in this magnificent building in the heart of the old town of Tallinn that is on the World Heritage List. And I've always wanted to come here and to visit this very unique place, but I didn't expect that when I should come here the first time would we speak in this parliamentary building. It's a unique opportunity. And it's also for me very strange as a governor to be here in Estonia and look a little bit at the history. Estonia is now a successful independence since 22 years ago, that we're discussing joint opportunities with making business with China, between the countries in Baltic Sea region and China. Who could predict such a conference 25 years ago? I couldn't. I was walking in the shop floor in the steel plant of Luleå, and I could not ever imagine that Soviet Union should have fell down, that China should grow like this, that the Baltic states should be independent states. It's fantastic, I think. And who could imagine 25 years ago that the world should develop in the way it did, with the remarkable growth of the Southeast and East Asia, and that a new economical superpower like China should have been developed? An economy that has a huge impact on the rest of the world. Now it makes almost 50% of all the steel in the world and 50% of a lot of other things. And nobody can forget this. And the speaker, Markus Lohi, showed a lot of examples of this development. Also a lot of consequences of this huge development on the climate, on the consumption of raw materials, on the environmental for Chinese people, but also for us. I've been governor for Östergötland for almost 3 years now, and then the head of the county administrative board. And this also means that I'm responsible for the Bench project, as we are the leader of this project. And the focus of this Bench project is really to make better use of the established contacts with China to the benefit of industry and trade in Estonia, in regions of Östergötland and Finland and rest of Sweden, of course. And with my background in the steel industry, including a number of international business contacts and commitments, I'm proud really to be a part of this new collaboration and development of the contacts between the regions around the Baltic Sea. And the Bench project that is very unique is really a test of this cooperation between us and how we can develop our business contacts with the Chinese market. as many other countries within the EU, Sweden, Finland, Estonia, we are small countries. We are like suburbs of some of the huge Chinese cities. And we have to understand that, and that means we have to work more together to help each other. And as previous speaker talked about the environmental challenges in China, we have worked with environmental issues in our region for a long time, and I think we can give a lot of opportunities for them to help them and to at the same time develop business between our regions and China. And that maximize the opportunities for our businesses, but also for Chinese businesses and their regions. In our countries, we have a lot of expertise and knowledge which should be of interest to other countries. But in order of taking advantage of this and to be able to compete on this global market, we have to develop even more an active foreign trade. We are small and we have to be export-oriented and oriented with foreign trade. Through collaboration, we can facilitate for our small and medium-sized enterprises to do business with a huge market in China, as one example. Through supporting companies, we can contribute to decrease their risk for failure, as well as to open doors in China, which would be almost impossible for small companies. It's not easy at all. In China, high-ranked public representatives in business delegations from other countries, we have an important role as door openers, as ensuring the reliability of the company representatives. And it's important to be aware of it, that it takes a long time to build good relations with our counterparts in China. And in order to be successful, a long-term commitment and a sincere will to achieve results of mutual benefits are what counts. And that goes for both public representatives and companies. Well aware of this, the Bench Project arranged a joint business delegation trip to China last year. You could see from the film what we were doing part of our time. Representatives and companies from all three countries participated. So-called Nordic rooms were arranged, where our regions and companies were promoted, and this was arranged in 3 cities, all of them very big. Official meetings, business meetings, and expert seminars presenting necessary knowledge for doing business in China took place. I think it was very valuable, and we know that if you don't listen in an early stage how to do and what to not do, you can really lose money, and that can be very costly for these small companies. At a meeting the other day with a representative from the Chamber of Commerce of East Sweden, the significance of door opening role once again was emphasized. This representative, who is responsible for the foreign trade contacts, told me that the contacts that had been achieved during our joint business trip to China had been most valuable and helpful afterwards for some companies. But when she, without earlier established contacts, tried to get in touch with the research and development department at a bigger Chinese company on behalf of a Swedish company that hadn't taken part in this type of delegation, neither she nor the Swedish Consulate General, who really tried to help this company, even could pass through the company's switchboard. And you can imagine, if you're a small company, how to get in touch with the right people if you don't have the help of call it door openers. The program for today's conference mirrors really the focus area of the Bench Project, and I'm really looking forward to listening to all the speakers and to listen to the experiences they've been getting through this collaboration. And I would once again like to thank the Estonian Chamber of Commerce and Industry for hosting this conference. And I'm convinced that this day will be useful and we'll share a lot of experience together. Thank you.
And now we go to the program. I see that we are very well on time. This is the Estonian way of doing things. Today's conference is built up, basically we have 3 panels. Probably you have read. The first panel is where we talk about Nordic-Chinese relations. Second panel is about when we talk about SMEs going to China, doing business with China. And third panel, we talk about investments, which is quite of a, let's say, mythical thing. Are there really Chinese investments here or not? We have had some changes also in the program, and every time we get some, let's say, news to change a lecturer, we say that the program gets better and better all the time. But I think it has not influenced the quality of this seminar. And now I would like to call here Mats Denninger, High Representative for the Sino-Swedish Environmental Technology Cooperation, Ministry of Enterprise, Energy and Communications. Please, the floor is yours. You moderate the panel.
Thank you. Oi. Thank you very much, Peter. I'm also very pleased to be here in this conference or seminar. I was also happy to be present at the very first seminar, I think it was, in 2010 in Linköping. I can feel the pressure of keeping time. That is one of the tasks for a moderator, and I will do my best to do so, having a very qualified panel to my disposal for half an hour or so. You have already seen, I think, in the program, the main CV content of the qualified participants. Mr. Marko Mihkelson has already addressed the audience here, as well as Governor Nilsson from Östergötland and Markus Lohi. In addition, Ben Butters will also, Ben, where is Ben? Oh, there is Ben. Will also attend this first panel in a minute, and also give an address from the Eurochambres, or a presentation rather, about the view from the Eurochambres facilitating European Union-China business cooperation, and we'll come back to that. I will, before we just start, so that you know a little bit more about my background, in addition to what is here in the write-up. Since 2008, I have been responsible for a special Swedish government initiative promoting, in the first place, environment, technology, sustainable urban development business with China, 2008 to 2010, and that was how I got involved in the bench project at first. But from 2010 and onwards, also including Russia and India. But the main task is exactly as the bench has been doing, to promote in my mission, the Swedish industry. Here we are talking about the Nordic business opportunities and also the European perspective. I will not, for the sake of keeping time, I will not spend more on the introduction, but I would like to invite the panelists, Mr. Mihkelson, Ms. Nilsson, and Mr. Lohi, to this little table here. That's how the show will be set. We'll be sit here and listening. And as you are coming forward, also Mr. Mihkelson here, as you are getting forward here, I will invite Ben to take the main chair and give us the European perspectives. You have the floor, Ben.
Thanks, Mats. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you to the bench partners for inviting me here. I'm getting used to this, but I'm always humbled by the fact that in many international conferences, I am the only native English speaker. So if I say something you don't understand or start to speak too quickly, please just throw something at me or wave your hand in the air and I will try and explain. I work in Brussels, so I'm used to being in a multilingual, multinational context, so hopefully you'll be able to cope with my English and I won't stray into slang or weird accents or anything like that. But anyway, I'm very glad to be here, very glad to have the privilege to come to Tallinn to meet our members, the Estonian Chamber of Commerce, and look forward to taking part in the panel with the other esteemed panelists in a few minutes. But to begin with, I would just like to tell you a little bit about what we are working on from an EU-China perspective. Eurochambres is the European Association of Chambers of Commerce. Our members are the national associations of chambers of commerce, so the Estonian chambers, the Swedish chambers, etc., 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 from across the EU and from another 17 or 18 countries around the EU, including Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, down to Turkey and Israel even. A very big network of chambers, 2,000 or so local and regional chambers, representing, we claim, we argue, about 20 million businesses. We haven't counted that number precisely, and I'm not exactly sure if it's totally up to date, but it's more or less in that region. The vast majority of those 20 million businesses are small or medium-sized enterprises, which at European level we define as 250 employees or less. I think in a country like Estonia, a company of 250 is a pretty big business, whereas in China it's probably a pretty small business. But at European level, we're somewhere in the middle and consider an SME 250 employees or less. There are other criteria, turnover, etc., but the main one is this employee one. As Mr. Mihkelson said, it's important to look at things from many different perspectives: local, national, neighborhood, and global. And that's exactly what the Chamber Network does. Eurochambres is somewhere in the middle, partly neighborhood, so everything in and around the EU, and partly global because we're heavily involved in facilitating business opportunities for European SMEs around the world. And I'll go on to explain a little bit about that in a moment. But in broader terms, Eurochambres works on a whole range of dossiers which are relevant to the business community. Innovation, regulatory reform, skills issues, energy, availability of energy, improving energy efficiency. A key one at the moment is access to finance. A lot of our members are really struggling to gain credit or secure equity funding, so this is really a big problem in the economic crisis that much of Europe is suffering at the moment. And finally, market access. That's a very, very important role for chambers of commerce. And by market access, we mean, again, at all levels. But at Eurochambres, our focus is largely on making sure that the EU internal market works properly, that European companies can buy and sell goods and services easily throughout the EU, and increasingly that European companies are in a position to exploit market opportunities across the world, notably in the rapidly developing countries such as China. Another key issue for us at the moment is the EU budget. You've probably followed this a little bit in the media. It's a big issue at the moment. We've got a big fight between those countries, those member states who think that the EU budget should shrink because national budgets have in many cases shrunk as a result of the economic crisis and fiscal consolidation measures, whereas other countries believe that the EU budget should actually grow and act as a real catalyst for economic growth and synergies between the member states. This is all being discussed among member states, between the Council, the Commission and the Parliament at European level. And really our message is that it has to be an EU budget which reflects the sorts of things we're talking about today, creating growth and stimulating competitiveness. So we're really fighting that cause at European level. Going on to EU-China business cooperation, which is the topic of my presentation today, I want to spend a few moments explaining why this is important, then a few more moments on what it entails, and then finally I'll go on to how it's being implemented at European level, how the chambers are involved, how the European Commission is involved. Our perspective is very much a helicopter one, I suppose you would say. We're up above with a broader panorama. We're not so directly involved often as projects like Bench, which is really delivering on-the-ground support to businesses. We do some of that, but also we have to take a much broader perspective on what is going on in terms of policy and support services in relation to EU-China cooperation and EU-India cooperation, EU-Southeast Asia cooperation, EU-Latin American cooperation, EU-Russian cooperation, a whole range. But China is a particularly important one for reasons which I will now explain. The World Bank classifies China as an upper middle income economy, which is a horribly technocratic term. But I think in rather simpler terms from a business perspective, China is really both a major opportunity and a major challenge. That's unsurprising when you look at some of the figures. EU-China trade has increased dramatically in recent years. In fact, it's more than quadrupled since 2000. The EU is China's biggest trading partner, and China is the EU's second largest trading partner. And apparently, according to the Commission, the two economies trade more than €1 billion worth every day. Although the EU imports from China declined in 2009, 2010, that period, following the general downward trends in EU 27 imports, they started to grow again and reached a new peak of nearly 300 billion in 2011. And China is fundamentally the EU's fastest growing export market. China-EU trading goods continues to increase despite the crisis. And China is strategically important for many European companies. According to the recent business confidence survey of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China, 75% of the respondents regard China as a top 3 destination globally, and that is continues to increase in importance. Unsurprisingly then, China is considered as very important. It's the second largest economy in the world, and that's just 3 decades after it opened up to the global economy. It enjoys annual growth rates that most of the EU can, in the current climate, really only dream of. They're worried that growth is dropping to under 8% for 2013, whereas most European countries would like some growth. Anything above stagnation would be considered a bonus. I know that Estonia is bucking that trend to an extent and has growth rates of I think nearly 4%. But in many European countries there is zero growth, or in fact, to use a horrible English euphemism, negative growth. So there clearly is a worrying growth trend in Europe, and a very positive one in China. Of course, the starting points are very different, and I think that's why the Chinese economy is slightly worried that the growth rate is slowing down. But nonetheless, it's clearly a very rapidly developing economy. And of course, when we look at the sheer scale of the country, the human capital, the technical and physical infrastructure, the natural resources, clearly this is a market of extreme importance to the EU. But at the same time, there are many legal, procedural, administrative, cultural and logistical barriers to trading with China for European countries, and those are particularly acute for smaller businesses. Governor Nilsson referred to the very practical problems of even getting past the switchboard for a small business if you don't have the language capacities, a common language. These sound like silly things, but they're fundamental barriers if you're trying to develop contacts and sell or buy goods and services in another economy. I'm just going to go through some of these barriers in a little more detail. After WTO accession, China committed itself to reducing non-tariff trade barriers, yet many European partners still complain that too little is being done, notably in terms of finance, real estate and service industries. Nonetheless, China is significantly more open than it was 10 or 15 years ago, not only thanks to WTO accession, but also thanks to internal decisions and bilateral discussions between the EU and China. But the obstacles still remain, and we need to reduce these non-tariff trade barriers, and progress is in some areas quite slow. We also need a further reduction of barriers to allow European players to compete in markets that would result in bringing significant international experience and expertise for China. So it would help China as well. European companies possess the experience and know-how for tackling some of China's biggest challenges, such as the environmental issues that were referred to earlier, and answering the needs of an aging society, which is something that both Europe and China is having to tackle. In terms of finance, there are many long-standing market access barriers. Some of them have been lowered and removed, but some of them still remain. In terms of real estate, which I mentioned before, domestic and foreign investment in the real estate market is still very tightly controlled by the government in order to control housing prices and excessive investment. And perhaps most significantly, despite some positive signs of openness, the market for trade in services in China really still is not an open one. And given that the services sector in the EU is 75–80% of GDP these days, that really is a very significant barrier to European companies, and particularly SMEs, which are even more strong in the services sector, from taking advantage of the opportunities that China offers. And these obstacles don't only relate to market access, but also to competition, equal treatment, and issues like data protection and information security. So there are problems. Apart from these legal problems, there are also IPR difficulties, and there are some very practical, bureaucratic, administrative problems, cultural problems. We referred to languages before, but there's also different consumer habits, lack of local knowledge. These are all problems which need to be tackled, as well as operational issues like actually establishing a company or a subsidiary in China, which is hugely problematic. In broader terms, from a European perspective, exports not just to China but in general are vital to the European economy and to our economic growth and competitiveness. The OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, estimates that by 2015, 90% of global growth will be developed outside the EU. In other words, European companies that do not have an effective export strategy are significantly restricting their growth potential. We at Eurochambres conduct an annual survey, the Eurochambres Economic Survey, and one of the questions that we ask in that survey, which is answered by 50 to 60,000 businesses across the EU, including Estonia, is where they consider their significant growth to be coming from. Is it domestic? Is it export? And for the last 2 or 3 years, the pattern has been more and more towards export. More and more companies are looking to exports as the route to economic growth and recovery. Sometimes we question whether that is just blind hope because the domestic markets are so stagnant in some member states, but I think in other countries it really is based on the trend, and that exports really are growing. Even reading the newspaper in the plane last night on the way to Tallinn, it's clear that in Estonia, as well as Latvia and Lithuania, companies are attaching huge significance, a huge potential to growth, to exports rather. But exporting remains a challenge for Eurochambres' core members, the SME community. There was a study conducted by the European Commission a couple of years ago, which concluded that only 25% of small and medium-sized enterprises trade outside their own country with other EU countries. So 1 in 4 SMEs trade within the EU. But only half of that number, 1 in 8, trade beyond the EU. So 13% of SMEs in Europe trade outside the EU 27, soon to be 28 when Croatia joins in a few months. So I don't need to tell you that means that 7 out of 8 companies aren't trading outside the EU, which is a worry, I think, and clearly a sign, well, it's not just a worry, but it's also a potentially important new opportunity for the European SME community. The European Commission has calculated the potential benefits of an ambitious external trade agenda to equate to a growth of GDP by 2%. So if they pursue an ambitious trade agenda, they believe there'll be 2% growth in EU's GDP, which is equivalent to the Austrian and Danish economies joined together. And they estimate that this ambitious trade agenda could create up to 2 million new jobs across the EU. And already 30 million jobs in the EU, so that's 10% of the workforce, depend on sales to the rest of the world. And that's a 50% increase from 1995. So, in a nutshell, exports are important. China is a very important market, and it has a huge amount of potential. So what is being done about this? Well, on the one side, the EU is increasingly involved in trade negotiations. In the past, it's been a national competence, but increasingly that is being delegated by the 27 member states to EU level. This was all put in place by the Lisbon Treaty, which was agreed, gosh, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago now? And that Lisbon Treaty also created a new service at EU level called the European External Action Service, which oversees these trade negotiations, and it oversees support measures to companies, to European countries in third countries. The European Commission also in 2008 adopted a new communication called the Small Business Act, and that had a very heavy focus on internationalization and led to the establishment of the first European business centres abroad, something which I will come back to in a few moments. And this is all funded through various schemes. The key one at the moment is the partnership instrument, which provides funding for cooperation with industrialised companies. It's support for EU SMEs that are hoping to trade with other industrialised countries, including including China. There's no free trade agreement on the horizon between the EU and China, so the EU is instead focusing on more specific, more precise negotiations, and is trying to tackle various challenges that I referred to earlier, step by step, incrementally. The final strand of my presentation is to look at these measures, these instruments which are being used to support European small businesses abroad. The EU business centres are the main strand of this, and I will talk about these when I can find my notes from a China perspective. There are plenty of different EU business centres, but the most relevant one today is the EU SME Centre in China. This was established very recently, and its aim is to support EU SMEs to establish, develop and maintain commercial activities in the Chinese market. It provides free, confidential information and advice, as well as practical support services to those SMEs. And it has an office in Beijing with an experienced staff, multicultural team of 15 people. So its main areas of expertise are business development, legal support, standards, and help with human resources. So help on recruitment, labour costs, intercultural management issues, those sorts of things. I don't want to blind you with precise details of what the SME Centre does, but it's a very important service. Eurochambres is part of the consortium that organises it, along with several European bilateral chambers based in China. So it's something that is very central to the chamber network. We're also involved in similar centres in India, in Southeast Asia, and potentially in one or two other countries as well, where the Commission is looking to develop them. If you do want more information, we'd be very happy to send you web links and details. Another way in which we have been helping, and one which my colleagues from the Estonian Chamber are familiar with, is a program called the Understanding China program. This is something that Eurochambres ran for 4 years, from 2009 to 2012. And it was designed not for SMEs themselves, but for intermediaries like Chambers of Commerce, business representative organisations. And it adopted a train-the-trainer approach. It involved 4 different modules, which were delivered both in the EU and in China. We have a whole alumni of former members here. You'll recognise several faces in here if you want to take a look. Mait and Peter have both been involved in the past, if I understand correctly. And it's been a very successful scheme. It's really helped, we believe, and we're hoping to do it again, and the Commission is looking into ways of funding it. The final service I wanted to mention was the China IPR Help Desk. Eurochambres isn't directly involved in that, but nonetheless it's a very important service based in China, and provides guidance and personal advice on how to protect your IPR in China. So, really, to conclude, as I said before, China is both an opportunity and a challenge to EU businesses. The opportunities and challenges are magnified for smaller businesses, so services and projects such as the bench one, I think, are extremely useful, extremely valuable in helping these smaller businesses to really exploit the opportunities of the Chinese market. Chambers of Commerce are involved in many aspects of this. At European level, we're really more involved in the export side of it. I think increasingly we will get involved in the investment, the import side of it as well. It's not been a competence at European level in the past, but more and more the EU is getting involved in foreign direct investments policy as well. So that will be growing at European level as well. But China is a market that we ignore at our peril, whether we are frightened of it or motivated by it. It's there, it's huge, and we have to really capitalize on the opportunities rather than bury our heads in the sand. So I think that the Bench project is very important in that scope. What we do at European level is very important, and what the chambers at national level do is equally important. Mats, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I want to share for you. I think that we can all agree that you spoke very slowly, very precise. It was good to hear a piece of good English. I will now start to mistreat your language for a while. Thank you very much for that broad introduction that gave us also a glimpse of what the European Union is having in their toolbox with regard to support for not the least SMEs coming to China doing business. Now, we have about half an hour for this qualified panel to give some reflections on particularly the Nordic-China perspective. But I also will try to set aside around 10 minutes, Peter said at least 7, for questions from the audience. So when the discussion goes along, please think about sharp questions to be put to the panelists or whoever would be ready to respond. I think I will start with foreign affairs perspective, Marko. Yeah, exactly. You have the mic there. As a politician, you are used to that kind of devices. You are not. Now it's green. The theme of the seminar is Nordic-China perspective relations. We would probably agree that we can have a joint perspective on China. But what about the Chinese, if you look at China from your political platform? Do you think that, do China consider Nordic as an existing entity on Earth? Or how do you think the Chinese, from your contacts, how do you think the Chinese administration, policymakers, decision makers look at the Nordics? They know about Finland, they know about Estonia, they know probably about Sweden, but what do they know about the Nordics?
No, first of all, thank you for this interesting question. I think this is very important as well to a little bit study about. My experience of meeting Chinese officials goes back only last 7 years. My first official visit was in 2006. Since then, I have been there, let's say, 4 or 5 times, meeting people from different, from sort of political level, from business as well. And my knowledge is that that their knowledge is growing rapidly, and they are very well informed in detail. It's sometimes even quite surprising that the meetings what we had, let's say, were very well prepared by their side actually, and not only knowing where Estonia is, for instance, or the Nordic countries, but exactly the numbers of some sort of efficiency or sort of what our businesses can offer them, let's say, ports or some other to bring as an example. But also what I in China, but also in some other Asian countries, I think so we should think about a Nordic brand as such, and I think so the network between Nordic countries in terms of finding together cooperative ways into the markets, including also to China, I think so is somehow working, because this part of the world is known by quality, by standards, clean tech, some other topics. I think that there are very good potential. And plus also, let's say here we don't talk about this kind of sector like tourism, for instance. But I think that this is where the Nordic countries or countries in this region can very well cooperate in terms of engaging the Chinese tourists, which are very welcomed actually, because they are very good tourists in terms of leaving money in the countries they're traveling. So I think so this is the area where we can more and more cooperate between Nordic countries. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marko. If I turn to Elisabeth, you were one of the initiators of and big promoters. Have you been of the bench project? If you take on Marko's perspective that yes, there is potential in the Nordic identity in China, but there is still some work to be done. That is how I got you. What would you think the bench project has contributed in that direction?
I think we have learned a lot how to work together, because this was really an experiment from the beginning for us as authorities, but also for our consulate general to work with other countries' administrations, like in Shanghai. So it's you have to develop way of working. They are used to work with their countries' companies and organizations, but then when you suddenly you have organization from other countries, our structures are not always used to handle this type of situation. So we have to find ways how to help each other and find structures for that. And as many have said before, as we are that small, and it's really costly to establish offices and offices that help these SMEs. How can we do it jointly to reduce the cost? Because we have to be cost efficient in all our countries, and maybe how to find a way of doing that. And we have our separate administrations, political systems, etc. But how to make something jointly would be interesting.
So you think we have scope for a new project then?
Yes, I think so.
Markus, I happen to know that you have a professional background in international accounting business.
Yes.
Was that reasonably correct?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit correct.
But we agreed that you make only easy questions.
Only easy questions. That was why I took departure in your professional history, and that is probably some few years back. My question is, you have seen companies for sure doing international business, what problems they have, what challenges are involved, both big and small, probably. What is your perspective? How easy would it be, also to refer to Ben's presentation here? How easy would it be for a Finnish or Estonian or Swedish SME company to enter into the great markets we are talking about, particularly China? Well, do they have a chance? Should we think differently, or is this the way forward?
Well, when I worked with SMEs 2 years ago, I involved some business operation with companies who have some startups in China markets, and I suppose that the most difficult challenge is the culture. However, the businessmen told me that the surrounding and the culture and the bureaucracy and these kind of things are so different in China that I could say that Nordic companies should learn much about this before they try to start up their business in China. This is my comprehensive concerning this question and issue, even if I have not any personal experiences concerning China market, but many my clients have told this kind of experiences.
So do the homework. That is the advice.
Yes, and of course, I think that this kind of cooperation, such as Ben's project here, is very good experience. That the bigger companies have much more resources to go abroad, but SMEs, they need especially cooperation, and of course in Finland in politics we have discussed actually quite much about should we support all companies when they try to globalize, or should we focus and concentrate our resources at the state level also for some ones, and my personal opinion is that bigger companies, unfortunately, maybe here is some who represent them, but we have many examples that they have relocated their business activities to Asia, and we trust in Finland, and personally I trust that SMEs have a good possibility to provide employment in future, but they have to go abroad and they have to learn and make homeworks, and then they can expand their business and also give many works and provide employments locally also.
But probably Outokumpu or Stora Enso could bring along some SMEs from them doing business, for instance, in China.
Well, that's right. And I don't want to mention any company especially, but I think that
as a moderator, I can do that.
Yeah. That's true. But of course, we need all sides of companies, and the state level in Finland. Currently, we discuss about how we can support and boost the companies, small companies, to grow, and we believe that by this way, when the small companies can grow and become bigger and bigger, they have a possibility to give job, and this is our future, and we see that this is good prospect for Finland and the Nordic country also.
Thank you, Markus. Ben, this morning when I had breakfast very, very early, close to the local, to the small airport in Stockholm Airport, you can't read this because it's a very strange language. It's Swedish business edition of Svenska Dagbladet, and the heading here that some of the Swedes may read, but I will interpret it, is Sweden is losing in the export fight. That's the Swedish angle, but if you read the article, it's a comprehensive survey done by Business Sweden and a previous Swedish Trade Council, and it shows that 2 years before the financial crisis emerged, from 2006 to 2011, Chinese export raised from $900 billion in 2006 to $1,900 million in 2011. And what is behind that? Behind that is, of course, greater demand in some of some international markets. But if you look at the situation in 2011, it is very clear that the European Union or great parts of the OECD, including Sweden, are the losers. China surpassed both Germany and US during those 5-6 years, being the biggest exporter. And here we are now talking about what can we do? What can we do to promote European companies, Nordic companies to enter into the market? That China is raising an export means that, of course, they are also being more and more skilled on their domestic markets. So, Ben, what shall we do about this? That was not an easy question.
No, it wasn't an easy question. I'd slightly challenge the idea that just because China is doing better automatically means that we're doing worse. It's not a zero-sum game. Just because one country is exporting more, it doesn't mean that other countries aren't also exporting more. Of course, China, as I said, the Chinese economy is growing exponentially. It is exporting. It's opening up more and more. So, in a sense, it's logical that it's catching up, or in many cases overtaken, other global economies in terms of its export performance. But that doesn't mean that the other economies aren't also doing well. Germany is a phenomenal export country still. And as I said, the results of our survey suggest that most countries in Europe, either through blind optimism or genuine progress, are putting their hopes in exports. And of course, China is an export market as well as a competitor. It's huge. It's got huge potential. Clearly, there's also huge potential to remove barriers. It's perhaps not an open market in the same way that the EU is. And we have a constant debate at European level about whether that's the correct approach or not, whether there should be total reciprocity or whether the EU should continue to pursue, as the Chambers advocate, a fully liberalised trade agenda. But that debate will go on and on and on. But nonetheless, in the meantime, we just have to make the most of it and try and tackle barriers where they remain and reduce barriers where we can to make the most of the Chinese opportunities. Can I also return to something that was addressed before, or am
Yes, I'm sorry I didn't mention that, but of course you have to, you are very much allowed to comment and reflect on each other's comments. Yes.
Thank you. It's this issue of a brand Nordic, which I think is an interesting one, because in Brussels at European level, there's a lot of talk now that the EU is getting more involved in export promotion about the EU brand. And our sense is when we go to China or to India, that the EU as a brand is invisible. It's of no relevance at all. An Indian business doesn't know what the EU is. They know what Finland is. They know what Sweden is. They know what Britain is. But they don't know what the EU is. I think at the moment our conclusion is it doesn't really matter, even though the Commission is totally obsessed with this problem in some departments. But to me, the Nordic brand is somehow or other more coherent, more obvious. As a Brit, the Nordic brand has certain qualities, certain implications to me.
Clean water, fresh air.
Exactly. But healthy, clean, international, social, lots of positive images that one associates with brand Nordic. And I think that those can be capitalized on, whereas the EU brand is very messy, very confused. Is it Roman remains in Italy? Is it I don't know, there's so many different aspects to the EU. I think it's very hard to develop a coherent brand.
Elisabeth, do you agree?
I think you know that better than me, but I think we could use that brand, first of all, of course, our each country's brand, but also the Nordic brand. And Östergötland, the county of Östergötland has an agreement with the Jiangsu province of China, a province with around 78 million inhabitants. And we are like the cousins from the countryside, but still we have good contacts. And when I meet my counterpart, the governor of Jiangsu, although I'm the governor of something with 430,000 and he is something else, we have an equal discussion, and it helps the companies and the university that takes part in this discussion. And I think with creating good relations that we have been working on for, I think, 13 years now, it has also developed business relations. And this autumn we had a training for administrative people of the Jiangsu province regarding how do we actually work with environmental issues in authorities, in municipals, in companies, within farms, etc. And today, people from my staff are in China for environmental audits.
And my as well. My
Yes.
staff as well.
And all this is part of an ongoing increasing exchange that also will develop business. It's a lot of small steps, and it's easy when you make businesses between Sweden and Finland, Estonia. It's so close and we understand each other, but I think continuously hard work will give results, and I think we could use the Nordic brand to even strengthen these relationships. And I know that we stand for something like high quality social welfare, good environment, cohesion, etc. Values that are also important in China.
Thank you. Marko.
Yeah, if I may, just to add, Ben, EU is messy because we all running for the best results down there. We are competitors on those markets and actually quite heavily competing with each other there. But I think there are also positive side, and it's, as much as we putting our energy on, for instance, free trade talks with the countries. We were a year ago in South Korea, and actually just after the agreement went in force. And actually, I think so. This is a very good step. And as far as we're starting now with Japanese, with others, so maybe one day it will also go with the Chinese as well. So it's one point. But on the other hand, I think that we here in Nordic Baltic area, we have very good formats where politicians actually working together, and actually somehow I think that the putting the common energy in terms of opening doors down there as well commonly and beneficial for our businesses, especially SMEs, is something what we probably should consider. We have not done yet, so thanks.
Thank you. I think that's there is surely untapped opportunities to utilize. I would, as you now so nicely, as Elisabeth described, the progress of the many small steps. I was wondering, when you take your Saturday morning walk in Linköping and you meet with the people there in the streets, and they think they should say something to the governor. They have read in the paper that you have been in Estonia on the final seminar of Bench that had costed some good Swedish taxpayers' money. So what? And they said, what is this good for? Will this bring business to Östergötland? Will it bring business to Linköping? Is it a good investment for me as a taxpayer?
When you have the type of job that I have, and we are an open country, very transparent, everybody could read about what we're doing in the newspaper. They can check my bills if I've been too costly when I've been here in Tallinn, for example. And I always think that I have to be able to explain this in a way that they feel that this is okay, that is worth the money, the taxpayers' money that we spend. Because if I can't do that, I shouldn't go here. And that's the easy way for me. And I'm very convinced, and I know that I can speak quite for a long time, how useful this is. And so I will not be scared if the journalist from Korren calls me or the local television station. I will be happy to inform them about this project.
Thank you. That sounds very convincing. Markus, we talked about back to the company perspective a little bit. Several of you panelists here has made the point that we should try to seek a more Nordic joint Nordic brand. We should try to exploit that in the market. There are a lot of positive aspects attached to that Nordic brand, etc. You know business well. You know how companies operate. I have experienced that together with some of you, yet not the least from Östergötland, also working very closely with companies. And I mean, we have Swedish companies fighting with Finnish companies in Wuxi, for instance, doing clean tech business there. So how should we get this together? What incentives can one use? What incentives can one use to get Estonian, Finnish, Swedish companies working together in this difficult market? Is there a political task to perform? Can politics assist?
Well, I hope so, that they can assist. But of course, we have to admit that we have many companies who compete with each other and in
which
the
is
Nordic
okay.
country. That's okay, of course. But there's no any. I suppose that however, there's no any big contradiction to make in the same time in some field cooperation also. And before this seminar, we discussed with Mr. Lieve here, and we spoke something about that in the same time we have to understand, and when people look at Nordic area from Asia point of view, for example, they can see that the Gulf of Finland is like a small river between the Estonia and Finland. And so by this way we can understand that the point of view is what is the most important when we speak about the cooperation. And we are so small countries, and population is so small that I suppose that however our companies competed and with each other, it's the best of all and the countries that we in the same time we try to seek all the time that which are the fields where we can cooperate.
The little experience I have is that one very effective way of doing this and simple is probably to bring right companies along on business delegations. They meet in the bus, they have lunch together, and all of a sudden business is being developed.
That's true.
Now,
I agree.
Any questions from the audience? I'm sorry, I'm not able to know all your names by heart, so you will have to start by introducing yourself by name.
Yes, Lumiste is my name, and I'm from Tallinn University of Technology. And my question is, how are developing transit links and transport links between EU, and what kind of initiatives? Basically, there are three options, either by railway through Russia, through the Suez Channel and Arctic route. Arctic route was just mentioned here by our deputy.
Anybody who spontaneously would like to take care of that one? No voluntaries? Marko.
Yeah, I think so. This is what you mentioned. The very last one is, I think, the most interesting option for a future. If we're talking about connecting Europe and Asia, connecting Europe and China, which is the northern route, which like was mentioned earlier, substantially will decrease costs, and as we all know, how importantly High North is in agendas of all our countries. Even Estonia, we had last week a very interesting debate in our Foreign Affairs Committee meeting on how Estonia should look at High North policies, and both in terms of also connecting us better in one more way with Asia. But also I think that air connections are something what is rapidly growing anyway. We in Estonia, we're struggling a little bit right now, but I'm very optimistic about that. In the future, we should also have our own linkage to Asia, because some statistics tells us that in 2025, out of all air passengers, 75% are coming from Asia. So.
No, I think it's a very interesting question. I was involved, just briefly, in a process some 3 years ago when the Swedish government made a study on the potential infrastructure opportunities with Asia, very much also looking at the Barents region. And I was in Shanghai, and we introduced that to Chinese leaders, and it involved as one very long-term option a new railway from China East Coast to no less than London, and that is a little bit more than 10,000 kilometers or so. But you know that the Chinese thought it was a very good project, because for them that is 3 years of railway construction. For us, it's unbelievable with all the permits and procurement processes and whatever. But 3-4 years, we can do it. So yes, something of the sort will happen. I'm pretty sure in upgrading, facilitate the trade administrative burdens, etc., etc. More questions from the audience here. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ya, and I'm from Linköping University. I'm a team of the bench in the Sweden part. I have a question for Ben, and you have a very interesting discussion with Matt, and previously you also mentioned about US Meat Center. Actually, during my study, I also checked some material from that part. I think it's very good, and they recently published 4 reports. I think it's very useful for every SME who want to be in China, go to in China. But my question is that a temporary project like bench will finish very soon, or do you have a continuity framework to continue to help with SME? Yeah, thank you.
That was a very specific question.
I'm afraid I don't have a specific answer, though, because I'm not sure. But it's a new project, I believe. In fact, I'm convinced that the Commission is in it for the long run, but I'm not exactly sure how long the current funding period is for. I would be really surprised if the Commission would pump a significant amount of money into a project like this if they didn't believe it would be a long-term initiative. So I expect, I can double check, and if you let me have your contact details, I can provide you the precise answer afterwards, but I would imagine that the initial contract is for typically between 4 to 6 years, and that there will probably be another call depending on the results of the first period, and presumably it would be continued if they believe that the impact is is good enough. But yeah, I think it is very, very important. It's an example of where the EU can add value. As I said before, I have doubts about this notion of branding European products in a coherent way. But I think that in terms of creating opportunities, reducing barriers, there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot of economies of scale that can be delivered at European level to help businesses from Estonia, Portugal, Greece, Ireland, wherever it may be, to enter into the Chinese market. And this is a very practical way of doing it. And if I may abuse the fact that I'm holding the microphone, I wanted to mention another project that we're involved in called Erasmus for Entrepreneurs. This is something that has nothing to do with China at the moment, but it puts together new and experienced entrepreneurs from different countries within the EU. So, for example, somebody in Sweden who wanted to start a business would be paired with an entrepreneur from France in a similar sector, but an experienced entrepreneur in the same sector, and they would go and spend time, several months, working with that entrepreneur, learning about the sector, learning about the barriers, the opportunities in that sector, developing an international perspective from an EU angle. And I wonder if this could be developed at a EU-Chinese level as well. Could we have an Erasmus for entrepreneurs between the EU and China? Could we twin new entrepreneurs from China with experienced entrepreneurs from Estonia, or a new entrepreneur from Sweden with an experienced entrepreneur from China, and get them to spend time together? Of course, there are many complications that we already find complications within the EU. Language is a problem. Having two entrepreneurs who have the time available at the same period is also a problem. But the people who have taken part, and that's several thousand now, all seem to, or the vast majority seem to believe this is a very valuable idea. So perhaps it's something we could think of between the EU and China in the future. And it's an idea I'll take back with me to Brussels.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That might be a possible continuation. I saw when Peter left now the audience hall here, I understood that the Estonian habit to keep time had clicked in. So I think we have to round off. I will, however, take a few minutes more. You might kill me afterwards. But I would like the four panelists here to just half a minute, maximum a minute, to reflect. What, next week, actually, formally, the new leadership of China will be, the new leadership in China. The party appointed their highest officials already some month ago, but it will now be confirmed, as you know, by the People's Congress. A new president, a new prime minister, a new government. They are said to last for 10 years. It's good. It's probably not that exciting as it is in some of our countries where you never know for how long governments will last. But the question is, what will China look like in 10 years' time when Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang has completed their term? Marko. Should we start from that?
I'm not futurologist. I'm not going to tell you what kind of China we have in 10 years' time. What I know for sure that if we look back to the last 10 years, dynamics is where, and dynamics is extremely sort of can produce very unexpected trends. Not only in our relations with China, I mean, but also in general in global politics. So it's we live in times of extreme dynamics, and at the same time, I think so we should use those challenges. What goes with Chinese leadership? I think so. It's I would use the words of Zhou Enlai, who said in '70s to Kissinger that it's. When Kissinger asked him about how he describes the French Revolution, he said that it's too early to call. Too early. It's 200 years. It's nothing. It's too early to tell something about that. So it's Let's see what happens and be ready for all kind of interesting trends and transitions.
Okay. So Elisabeth, when you return to China in 10 years, probably after you have completed your term as a governor, what are you likely to see?
I'm sure it will be cleaner, even more competitive, I think more transparent, and even more powerful.
Oh, thank you. Markus?
Well, that's the difficult question. But
that was an exception from the easy one.
I suppose that the economic growth will be continuing in China, and I hope that the current situation, which means that there is the regions which are not so developed and they have possibility to do something about these problems. And I hope that the environmental issues has much better than this day at the moment.
Ben?
Yeah, I'd follow that. I think that the green side of things is going to be a significant development. I think it will become a cleaner country, and that climate change will become a more significant factor in its development. I think there'll be more globally recognized Chinese brands, that's for sure. We're seeing it already. In the past, China, I think, was mainly copying ideas from elsewhere, but increasingly it is a source of innovation, and the global brands are developing. And I think another question that we should ask is what Europe we will see in 10 years.
That's another seminar.
We've got European elections next year, a new European Commission, and there could be huge change as well. So I wonder whether the Chinese are in parallel somewhere having a similar debate and asking the opposite question.
I'm sure. And we may have a free trade agreement with them. We may. Peter, I hand over to you.
Yes.
Thank you. I thank you very much, the panelists, for having responded so quickly and nicely to my questions. And Peter, you have the floor now.
Yes, dear panelists, dear Mats, thank you very much. Let's give a big applause to them. And don't go away yet. We would like, our Director General, Mr. Mike Paltz, would like to ceremonially give you the presents, very Chinese way. And we would especially like to thank Ms. Elisabeth Nilsson as coordinating partner of Bench project, of course. And to companies, when you go to China, don't never forget gifts to take along with you, or when you have Chinese guests, don't forget. Yes, thank you again. Now we have actually lunchtime. It will be at the cafe of the Parliament House. And let's try to resume at 12:30, but I understand when we start a little bit later, it's okay then. And please use this time also for networking. You can see that we have many Chinese native people here. I don't know if in Estonia, in any room, there has been such a concentration of Chinese people, actually. I would like to name specifically some of them. Xiao Tianshang, are you here? Yes, Xiao Tianshang, our good partner and friend in the Bench project, doctor, and Xiak Xiao, representative of Jiangsu Economical High Representative in Sweden. He also took time, came here. Dan Liu from Volvo company, and of course others. So let's go and have a lunch.